Hi everyone, welcome back to English for You. I'm Pat.
I'm Kat.
And today we're talking about the art of stand-up comedy. We started yesterday by looking at really what stand-up is. It's a performer who's on a stage telling jokes and funny stories.
Right, and so you can see all kinds of stand-up, and I think stand-up comedy is all over the world at this point. There's people doing it in all sorts of places, and it can be done in small clubs. You could see famous comedians touring in large arenas, things like that. But where did it start?
It started with comic speakers like Mark Twain, who would be invited to events to tell funny stories and entertain a crowd. But they would just tell these kind of same stories. It was a guy called Bob Hope who started what we'd think of as modern stand-up by changing his jokes and material for each show.
Okay, and so he was able to get material from things like gossip and daily news, things like that. But it started becoming a little more adult-ish in the 60s, thanks to the likes of, George Carlin,
Lenny Bruce, and some of the others, yes. Yeah, they made stand-up a little more adult. They talk about topics that people might think were shocking or too rude, a little bit not for children.
Yeah, a little bit yellow or blue.
Yes, we would say blue in the UK and the US. So they would joke about things that were not acceptable before or even not acceptable at the time, but kind of protected in, like, this is a comedy show, we can do this, and the right of free speech lets you do it and make jokes about it.
That's true, and I think even today there are certain things that can only be really frankly talked about if you are talking about it in the context of a joke. Yeah, so it is a way to get across a message or something you feel without, really offending too many people. So this focus on adult material gave birth to what we think of as modern stand-up, where there are a lot more dirty jokes. Not all, as Kat said, there are clean comics, there are dirty comics. But we often think if you go to a stand-up show, you might get a few naughty jokes. Yeah, exactly. So be prepared if you go to one. Don't, go if you have sensitive kind of morals, I guess. But today we're going to talk about what kind of techniques, what kind of practices are used in different kinds of stand-up, because it's not all one thing, as we're going to see. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Reading. The art of stand-up comedy. The description of a stand-up comedian might cause some people to believe their acts are all alike. However, there are actually many different types of stand-up comedy. A comedian must decide whether or not to script their set. A scripted set involves the comedian planning the jokes and then practicing them before the show. When comedians choose not to use a script, they may use an advanced technique called crowd work. The comedian looks at the audience and chooses people to interact with. They will then typically ask the audience member questions and make jokes with the answers and reactions. Another thing comedians might use is improvisation. The comedian starts their set without a plan and comes up with new ideas and jokes as they go. You must be confident to use improvisation, but it's a very engaging form of stand-up. Some famous stand-up comedians include Dave Chappelle, Ali Wong, and Taiwanese comedian Brian Tseng. So if you're in the mood for some humorous fun, why not check out some stand-up comedy?
Okay, so our article today starts off by saying the description of a stand-up comedian might cause some people to believe their acts are all alike. Now, we've already said that's not true, but of course we need to give you a little bit more examples to kind of help you understand. But first, we're going to talk about description if you are describing a stand-up comedian. So description is the noun form of the verb to describe. And a description is basically a statement that tells you how something is, how something looks, how it sounds, how it smells even, how it what kind of feeling it gives you. So a description is just a way of explaining the way something is. So if the description of a stand-up comedian is, oh, it's a person who stands on stage and tells dirty jokes, then yeah, you might think it's all the same, but it's not, and we're going to tell you why. But first, an example of description. Your description of the person you met yesterday sounds like my friend Sabrina. Was that her?
It could have been.
Could be.
So as we've been kind of mentioning as we've gone through this article, and we write it now, however, there are actually many different types of stand-up comedy.
So we've already talked about 2, clean and dirty, but there must be more than that.
Oh, yeah. A guy, Bill Bailey, a UK comic, he does a lot of music. He does funny songs, uses keyboards.
I think of Bo Burnham, I think also does music, and he does like satire. Yeah.
Lee Evans, another British comic, is known for his kind of crazy facial expressions and physical movements to lend a lot of action and stuff to his jokes.
Yeah, and I've seen ones who do it with puppets as well. Yeah. So we will first talk about, the decisions that they have to make before they even get on stage. So the article says a comedian must decide whether or not to script their set. That's a good point because sometimes they don't and sometimes they do. To script something or to make a script is to kind of plan how something is going to be done, how it's going to happen, the order in which you're going to say all these things, and what you're going to say. A script is the plan for a show. It's kind of the sheet that will have what you're going to say on it. So like we might use scripts for our recordings or scripts for if you're acting, things like that. So anything that you need to remember your lines, you'll usually have a script for.
Yep, and you'll script it, which is the verb to prepare that, to make that thing.
Yep.
And now we've got the adjective form of this word in the next sentence. A scripted set involves the comedian planning the jokes and then practicing them before the show. So the set is like their routine. Like, okay, I've got 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about this, this, this. And if they script it, if it's a scripted set, they'll think about all of that stuff beforehand. I'll maybe even write a few notes on their hand, like tell this story, then do this joke, then do this bit, and so on. And we use the word scripted as an adjective to mean it's been written down, it's been prepared beforehand. So it could be a scripted show. The things you see on TV are scripted shows.
Yeah.
It could be a scripted joke. You know that story. You know how you're going to tell it. It could be a moment in a live broadcast, like we've scripted, we're going to go now to this guy and he's going to give some kind of performances. We all know it's going to happen. Professional wrestling is scripted. Like it may look as though it's chaos, but actually they all know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, who's going to do this thing when.
It's not just scripted, it's choreographed, which is kind of like a script for a dance. All right. To script a set involves the comedian planning jokes. So to involve means to kind of require something as a needed part of it. So if you have a scripted set, it means you have to plan out your jokes. You have to practice them. You have to make sure that you know what you're doing before you go on stage. That's what it involves. So to say something involves something, it means that second thing is needed for it.
But they don't have to do this.
No.
Okay, they don't have to plan out all their stories. And we see in the article, when comedians choose not to use a script, they may use an advanced technique called crowd work.
Oh, that sounds so hard.
Well, I mean, when I've seen comedians, you can tell they're usually doing a bit of both. They've got some scripted jokes and stories that they will tell, but they'll also, like I mentioned in yesterday's chat question, they found out they've got some British people in this audience in America. So let's tell a few quick, funny stories and make a few jokes about British people. Those weren't scripted. They didn't plan those, but they'll just use what they know to come up with some funny lines about British people.
And sometimes they could even script to the crowd. Like they can lead them to say something and then be like, I got you.
Yeah, and here's the response. And so here we see script as a noun. Kat's kind of mentioned this. It's the written words used for a performance or the pre-planned something that someone is expected to do. Like if you're having a meeting, you could say, we've gone off script. That means the meeting's talking about something that's not on the agenda. You hadn't planned to talk about it. But if you just follow all the points in the meeting agenda, then the meeting is on script.
So when they're not choosing to use a script, they are using something called crowd work, and this is a technique in comedy. Now, I mentioned in the beginning we're going to talk about techniques. Scripting is a technique, but crowd work is also a technique. So technique is a way of doing something by using a special skill or some special knowledge. So crowd work is not easy. It's something that you have to learn how to do, something you have to have confidence in order to do. And so it's a special skill that you need to have. Technique can be talked about for anything that requires, some sort of skill that requires practice in order to get good at it. So, for an example, the singer for this band uses a special technique to make his voice sound deep and scary. Probably a metal singer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is crowd work, though? Well, we kind of mention it in terms of me and my friends getting told British jokes about. We see in the article the comedian looks at the audience and chooses people to interact with.
Right.
So this is where the comic show, this comedy show, becomes not just one person, but several people interacting. To interact or interact with people is to have a sort of back and forth conversation, discussion, question answers where both sides contribute. It's not just the comedian telling stories, they're asking questions, and the answers they get will lead them to other funny jokes or remarks or things they can say.
Yeah, exactly. I think a crowd work thing that I see often is they will pick somebody who's clearly there with their husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, and they'll say like, oh, did you drag them here or did they come willingly? That sort of thing.
Exactly. Or if someone's got kind of interesting hair or a particular kind of clothing on or something like that. Just something you can, or if someone looks really uncomfortable, then you might go, okay, I'm going to make you my
more
target.
Uncomfortable.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So they look for people to interact with. And they will then typically ask the audience member questions and make jokes with the answers and reactions. So this means typically, which we've talked about before, a typical show is a normal show. So typically doing something means normally you will do this. Generally, this is what happens. This is what normally happens. It typically happens.
So you ask the audience member a question. Hey, where are you from? They give you an answer. And you go, okay, I can tell a few jokes about their hometown, people from their part of the country, their part of the world, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, and because the audience members will give them an answer or a reaction. Maybe the reaction is to be uncomfortable. Maybe it's to try and say something about the comedian.
Hecklers.
People in the audience will say like, hey, you're not funny. And so... Yeah, and the comedian, if they're good, will use that and turn that into a joke. They'll use the reaction because a reaction is something that is said or done as a response to something else. So thing A happens and thing B happens as a reaction to that. It's responding to it in some kind of way. For example, you could say, what was your reaction when you heard that Steve is quitting his job?
I was shocked.
Exactly.
Not at all. All right, so the article goes on to say another technique, which is familiar to a lot of people. Another thing comedians might use is improvisation. So improvisation, and or improv, if you want to make it short, is when you perform without preparing. Basically without preparing anything, although sometimes you can go off of a very small, short script and then just talk off of that. And it can basically be you are using the audience's reaction or you're using things in your environment or in your mind to make jokes on the spot.
There are two different things here. A stand-up comedian who's doing improvisation probably just has a quick look maybe at the news or thinks about what's been happening in the world and just sort of makes things up off that. They think of funny stories, they talk about what's on their mind, but they do it in a funny way.
Yeah.
And kind of that's often when a comedian has a particular character in mind. They don't actually stand up pretending to be themselves. They take on a sort of personality.
Very true.
And then they'll tell a story or make it up. They won't really plan it. Improv comedy is a completely separate kind of thing where you play games and create actually acted scenes.
Like groundlings.
Yes, that can be funny. And that I've done a lot of on stage. And that one, you prepare the rules of the game, but that's it. Everything else comes from your audience.
Yeah, so basically there is a foundation.
Yeah, you practice how to do the games and how to do things that create good scenes.
Yeah, but you don't practice the scene itself.
Yes, you don't learn any of the lines that you will say. So as the article explains, the comedian starts their set without a plan and comes up with new ideas and jokes as they go. And if they're very quick-witted, if they've got a mind that works very fast, yeah, they'll maybe just talk about what's in the news and their stories and their jokes will flow out of it. Yeah. They will come up with new things.
What's the deal with airline food?
That sounds like a prepared one. It must be. Yeah. But to come up with means to create, to think of, just to have it pop out of your brain, of your imagination, when you're just really kicking those thinking muscles into gear and seeing what comes out.
Yeah. All right. So what would you come up with in a show like an improv show?
It could be any kind of game. A lot of guessing games where maybe the audience knows something, some of the performers know something, one performer doesn't and has to use the acting and the clues and the audience reaction to figure out some kind of who am I? Which celebrity did I murder with what?
Okay, that sounds fun. I'd like to go to an improv show sometime. All right, so when they are doing improvisation, you must be confident to use improvisation. But it's a very engaging form of stand-up. That's true, because when the audience knows that you are coming up with this as they are watching you, they're really interested in what you're going to do next. So you have to be confident in order to do that. That means you have to have a feeling that you can do something well, or you can succeed at it, or you have a belief that you can do that. And if you are also showing that you look confident, that's another way of saying that somebody's confident. So if you say, I am confident, means you believe that that you can do the thing. But if you say he looks confident, then that means basically he looks as though maybe he's kind of brave, but doesn't mean he is inside. So it can either be feeling that way or looking that way. But you have to be feeling confident in order to do improvisation. So, an example, you're always so confident when you talk to girls. I wish I could do it as easily as you.
Okay, and if you're confident when you do this, you will make an engaging form of stand-up or comedy. If something is engaging, it attracts people's interest and attention, and it keeps it. It could be a viewer like, oh, this is a cool story. This is an interesting character. It could be a reader going, wow, this is cool. I wonder what'll happen next in the book. I'm engaged. I am putting my feelings into this story and interests, and I'm getting caught up in it as if I'm watching it unfold before my eyes. So you might say, I didn't find this story very engaging because all the characters were mean and shallow.
Huh. Yeah, that doesn't sound very engaging at all. But there are some engaging comedians out there who you might know. Some famous stand-up comedians include Dave Chappelle, Ali Wong, and Taiwanese comedian Brian Tsang.
So, as the article says, if you're in the mood for some humorous fun, why not check out some stand-up comedy? So if you're in the mood for something, you have a feeling of wanting this thing, you want to have it, do it, experience it. We often talk about food. I'm in the mood for Chinese food. I'm in the mood for Indian food today. That means you want to have it.
Yeah, exactly. And so what would you be in the mood for? Some humorous fun. Humorous is just basically another word of saying funny. So because humor is something that makes you laugh. And humor can be spelled one of two ways, H-U-M-O-R in the US or H-U-M-O-U-R in the UK.
Woohoo!
Do you also spell humorous with the extra U?
Yes.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so something humorous. Here's an example. Although this movie looks sad and dark at first, it's actually very humorous and fun to watch.
Now, in that sentence, we also use today's language in focus, which is the sentence or starter, why not something, something, something? Why not do this? And we use this pattern for making suggestions. It's similar to, why don't we do this? How about blah, blah, blah? You're not actually asking someone for a reason why you shouldn't do a thing. You're just putting an idea out there. You're making a suggestion. So you could say, Hey, if you're really hungry, why not go for an all-you-can-eat hot pot?
So a why not is a suggestion of, hey, just do it. Why not? Why don't you do it? So why not check out some stand-up comedy? To check something out means to look at it, that's if it's attractive or interesting to you. So like if I say to Pat, hey, check out that movie poster over there, I'm telling him to look at it, and because I find it interesting and I think he'll find it interesting too. If you say you're going to check out a stand-up comedy show, maybe it's something you're not very familiar with, or maybe it's something that you just decided to go just a little while ago, but you are interested in it and you want to see it.
So, yeah, check out a stand-up comedy show. It'll be a lot of fun.
Agree.
And that brings us to the end of the article. We've just got time for our For You Chat question.
For You Chat.
So today's question, who is the funniest person you know? Why do you think they are funny?
Funniest person I know. I think when I was back in the US, I had some friends who could just make me laugh no matter what. But I feel like it was our situations together that made it funny and not necessarily them telling jokes. But if I have to think of a funny person that I know of, maybe a famous person, I think I like Eliza Schlesinger. She is an American comedian, stand-up comedian, who she won Comedy Central's like stand-up Last Comic Standing, like a comedy competition. And she's been doing stand-up ever since, and I think she's just really, really funny. Cool. She does all these voices and weird imitations and stuff like that. Very, very funny.
I'm going to put my friend Charlie in here, a guy I know, another British guy who lives in Taiwan. He has done stand-up a lot. He was with me in our Improv Comedy group. He does acting. He's done radio, presenting, funny stuff. And the reason he's funny is he's extremely intelligent and extremely quick. His wit will quickly get onto something and tell jokes. But he can also do anything from wordplay to kind of sarcastic, kind of like satirical comedy to just silly stuff to funny songs to humorous poems. He's just got a real gift for different forms of humor. So I love working with him when we've done stuff together. It's always a great time. We always just make each other laugh, just talking about nonsense. We both like bad pun, wordplay humor, and we could have Facebook conversations that go on like 100 comments of just silliness.
Oh my goodness, that sounds fun.
Yep. Yeah. So, Charlie, hope to see you again and work with you again soon. But that's all the time we've got for today. Thanks for listening, everyone. For English for You, I'm Pat.
And I'm Kat.
And we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Vocabulary Review.
Description. Carl always includes a description of his photos when he posts them on Instagram. He feels words help explain them better. Technique. The artist uses a special technique to create figures from stone. Reaction. Ken's reaction to the funny video was to laugh out loud. Confident. Isabel is very confident. She never seems to doubt herself. Engaging. The TV show was so engaging that I watched the whole of the first season in one night. Humorous. More than 1 million people have watched the humorous video of the dancing cat.
智慧小补帖
Script. Involve. Interact. Improvisation.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.voice www.english4u.net www.english4u.net